Dan York, are you willing to watch the Jabber Room? I don't think we need scribing as much as just in case somebody comes in and jabber. What is it? KSK. Or if somebody is willing to, I just saw you sitting near. Okay, yeah. I'm not expecting anyone there. I think that they'll probably be on Jabber, so. Okay, thank you. Okay, so good morning. This is the KSK Futures BOF. If you were here 10 minutes ago and you saw that it was about quick and you wanted it to be about quick, it won't be about quick. Yeah. So let me just start off with, to be clear here. One is this is not a working group forming BOF. And in fact, this BOF is not even meant to be talking about an internet draft or anything like that. We want to thank Warren Kamari, the AD, for allowing us to do this BOF. This BOF is actually for the benefit of the entire DNSSEC community who care about the KSK. And I have slides in a moment about what has gone on so far, but the idea of this BOF is not to bring work into the IETF. It is simply a way for us to have a discussion in a fashion where there are lots of people there who might want to discuss. But this is not IETF work at all. In fact, this BOF is the second meeting of 3 meetings. One which happened a couple of weeks ago in Kobe at the ICANN meeting, and another one that will happen in a little bit over a month at the ICANN DNS Symposium, which is the bit that is just before the next DNS OARC meeting. So anyways, let's move on forwards. So for those of you who are not familiar with the DNSSEC or specifically the KSK role, you probably will find this BOF pretty confusing. That is that stuff has already happened. The process for the KSK role started, many years ago, and the actual rolling of the key happened 6-ish months ago on 11th October, and the old key was removed just not even a week ago on the 22nd. So as before the process of rolling the KSK happened, many people thought, how should we handle the KSK? What should the algorithms be? How often should it be rolled? Who should be involved in all of that? And in 2015, a design team was set up from people outside of ICANN, people from the DNSSEC community. And they came up with a design for how the KSK should be rolled the first time. That worked. The design team had a very explicit, actually, any design team members here? Raise your hand, Jeff. Yeah, so we have a bunch of the design team members here. So that happened. There was a public consultation in ICANN, the way we do our public consultations with, everything's published. There's a 30-day period for people to make comments and such like that. So that all happened, and then a plan was, made from all of that, and it happened. On the 11th of October, the root zone started being signed with a new KSK, and that old KSK was revoked in the beginning of January and then removed just last week. So if you look in, if you do a dig for the root zone right now, you should not see the old KSK. If you do see it, you have some caching issues. But a lot of surprising things were discovered during the process. And I don't mean just at certain points. At many different points, many surprising things happened. So what that says is this is not as predictable as we thought it would be. Given all of that, and given that many of the people here and in other places have been watching the process, question is really, what have we learned about rolling so far that we can apply to future rolls? Now, we may decide we don't care about anything that happened before. We just have strong opinions. We want to move on future roles. That's not really what we want. We would like to do some learning. On the other hand, given that all the surprises we found, we don't believe that even if we've learned a lot, that that will fully inform us on our decisions on how to go in the future. There have already been a lot of people just saying what they want for a future role, and that's fine. Those voices are heard, but what we're looking for is as many new voices. So the process of creating a plan for the future KSK role is already happening. There's a link here for a white paper that I pretty much was like the primary author on, describing what has happened to date, with a fair amount of gory detail about technical and non-technical parts of it, you know, how we did the communication, such like that. Feel free to go read that at any point. We may update that in a little bit, we may not. It was accurate as when it was written, which was before this last steps. More importantly, however, is that there is a discussion list that we had originally started for news about the last rollover that we are still using as a discussion for upcoming roles, and the list is there. Today we will have some discussion at the mic. That's why we're here. I'm going to stop talking in a little bit. This is not meant to be a presentation by me, but nor is it meant to be a presentation by you of your views. It is fine for people to come up to the mic and say, I have this view, but what it would be most valuable, the reason why we're having this meeting here and why we had the last one 2 weeks ago and another one coming up, is to get discussion happening. The fact that you have a view is interesting, but it's also just an individual view. The fact that you have a view that is informed by other people's views is way more interesting. And the fact that other people might have changed their mind based on what you said is much more interesting. And to that end, really the mailing list is the place to go. And I'm not saying don't get up and say anything, we're not going to listen. Definitely the folks at IANA are going to be listening to the recording today for those of them who aren't here. But really the mailing list is the best place to do it, because mailing lists are good for discussion. They're much better for discussion than a mic line. And they're much better for discussion than a mic line that started 2 weeks ago, continues today, and will be picked up again in a month. So please, if you're at all interested in this, get on the mailing list. And I do want to, Yonea-san, are you here this morning? Yes, so at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, there was a good discussion at the mic, and Yonea-san got up and sent something to the mailing list afterwards, which started, if you look at the archives, you'll see that 2 weeks ago there's been another burst of activity. So I want to say thank you to Yonea-san for actually having done what I said, which was he repeated what he said at the mic on the mailing list and got things going. So that's exactly what I want today. So as I just said, saying things here is useful, but a group discussion is much more useful. What we discovered in the process starting in 2015, and I'm sure that some of the people from the design team can verify this, is that individuals can change their mind as they talk to other individuals about things that they had not thought of. And so if you look, as I was sort of watching the design team happen, what happened was that people would say, well, I want this. Well, that doesn't work for this reason. Well, yes, it does for this other reason. We were able to drill down much, much better. So again, the mailing list here will be useful. And then to be clear, the next step after that is that probably in the second half of this year, no guarantee, but that's what they're aiming for, IANA is going to review the discussion, evaluate the proposals, and they are going to prepare a draft plan. Not the plan, a draft plan, and it's going to go to the community again for public review. To be clear, I work for ICANN, but I do not work for IANA. That's a completely separate group. It is IANA who are the people who are in charge of the KSK. They sometimes ask for help from the group that I'm in, but they also more often ask for the community help. There are many groups that assist IANA already. There's the trusted community representatives who show up for all the boring key ceremonies. There are lots of other people. So we are having this process to give them even more input, but it's IANA who's going to take this discussion and come up with a plan. After that, like I say, there will be public review, and that will be announced on the mailing list, but it will also be announced to the entire ICANN community. And I'll make sure to bring, once the public review is happening, I'll make sure to bring it to at least DNSOP here in the IETF. So let's talk a little bit about surprises. Let's talk about what has happened in the last year or so. So this is a quick overview of things that folks of you who know DNSSEC should recognize, which is validating resolvers need to have the DNS key RR set in order to validate. So the RR set expires every 48 hours. That could change. That is something that can also be changed if people want. And so in the normal case, a resolver will ask for that RR set at least every 48 hours. Some resolvers actually ask for it more often, like they might have a TTL timeout of 24 hours maximum. So it happens more often. But generally, as you are validating, you go out and look. And if they get a response that can't be validated against their trust anchor, they're going to retry. Either that or they don't. So that seems that this is normal DNSSEC, nothing special for the root. So all of the root server operators have been watching the DNS key queries because we knew that, oh, as we are changing the root, things might happen. I don't have a laser pointer, but so looking at this graph, what you can see from the far left before the first line where it says key role was the sort of day-to-day what was being asked of the root server. This is not all the root servers, it's most of them. We don't get data from all of them. And then when the key roll happened in October, that number increased. So that means that some resolvers were not getting a DNS key RR set that they expected and kept asking for it more often. We sort of expected some of that. We also only expected that for maybe 48 hours during the TTL window. And then we figured, oh, users of those resolvers would in fact notice that they are now getting, NX domain or serve fail for everything, and they would tell those resolver operators. You will notice that that green line didn't drop after 48 hours. In fact, it still was pretty constant for months. To date, no one has really explained that increase and why it stayed. A reasonable explanation, in my mind, is that there's a whole bunch of validating resolvers out there with no users behind them, so they don't realize that they are not, that they are serving serve fail. But that's just my guess. Other people in this room might have guesses why that happened, and people were thinking about it for the few months. Then, in January, we actually revoked the key. And remember, revoking in the sense of RFC 5011 means publishing the same key with an extra bit turned on. Many people predicted at that point that the increased line would drop again because people would go like, oh, okay, it's been revoked. You'll notice that the opposite happened there to a large extent. It went up, and it went up at various points after that to be actually a pretty large percentage of the query volume of all queries hitting the root servers. The last red line, which you can barely see on the right-hand side, was what happened about less than a week ago, where we actually removed the key, and then the line drops completely again, right then. And in fact, if you were watching that day, it dropped within approximately a minute of the key being removed. I assure you, that was not what anyone in my group had thought would happen. We thought, oh, maybe this, maybe that. But the fact that everything would go away right then, the reason why I bring this all up is we've got some data. It did not match our expectations. Maybe, and by the way, if someone in the room absolutely predicted how this would look, let me know. I'm happy to quit my job and have you work for ICANN instead, because this was not something, like this. Wes, I know you didn't predict this chart. Please.
Wow, the stairs are just awesome.
Yeah.
Wes Herdiker, ISI. No, I did not predict
Thank
this.
You.
However,
good. My job is safe for the moment.
I have done simulations that shows why this is happening, and I reported the bug.
Yeah. So as this has been happening, people have been working, who have been seeing the data, have looked at this and have seen some things. But usually in the past, right, your simulations didn't predict this for the future.
I did not predict it for the future.
Right.
Absolutely right. And so I will come back later with a suggestion I have for our forward-going process.
Excellent. Good. And that's exactly what we want here. What we want in this discussion, and by the way, I only have another slide or two, but if you want to deal with this, please.
Oh, hi, Evan Hunt, ISC. I apologize, I just walked in, the doors were locked, so I missed the beginning of this, and this information might already have been mentioned. But I discovered the other day that there was a bug in old versions of Bind up until 9.10.0.
Right.
That likely explains this.
No, it explains little bits of this, but like you said, you walked in, the fact that there was a bug there does not explain the large jumps at certain times.
Unless maybe people were bringing on racks of servers that suddenly started behaving this way and then caused the increase in traffic.
It could be that racks of servers happened to be being turned on exactly when we did the revocation. Doesn't seem likely, however.
It would be periodically after the revocation.
Right.
We'd be seeing increases in traffic. I don't fully understand the root cause. I just wanted to let you know that there was a candidate explanation.
There are many, as I said, there are many candidate explanations, and we would love to get down to the reality. But for the discussion this morning, what's most important is we were surprised, we were surprised, we were surprised. We're happy, but we were also surprised, okay? So this is a chart that we produced for what happened before and after the revocation. And the main thing in this chart to notice is the pink blob above the large, I'm not good with colors, aqua area. The aqua area in the middle are resolvers that, I guess I called it green. Doesn't look green on this screen. That are hosts that are asking for the DNS key at about the same rate before and after. So what this is showing is rates, individual resolvers, how often they asked before and after. And so the green blob in the middle is the ones who didn't change the way their pattern of asking before or after the revocation. The pink blob above are the ones that started asking a lot more. And so you'll notice that, in fact, that pink blob has a lot of dots in it. Now, also notice that there are some that asked a lot less after the revocation. Not exactly clear why this chart isn't just one green blob and one pink blob. There is a chance that some resolvers stopped validating after the revocation. There is a chance that a lot of this is due to IP addresses changing. So we're not trying to do the analysis here of exactly why this is. We do want the analysis done. It's perfectly reasonable for people who are doing the analysis to use the mailing list that I listed earlier to bring up why. Again, these charts are to show that there are lots of interesting things about the KSK future that we need to think about that might not be as obvious as, I've thought about this for 10 minutes and this is what I want. Or that person who spoke before me in the mic line makes good sense, therefore I'm going to agree with them. It's pretty darn complicated. So let me go through, I've got 2 slides of just general what the previous comments were. This is not meant to say, please agree or disagree with any of these comments. It's to give a flavor for what you might say at the mic line. We are not only looking for like how often to roll. A lot of people came to the last meeting thinking, okay, I'm just going to pick a number and say how often to roll. There's lots of questions that go into the idea of the KSK future. So one of them is, again, why roll at all? What are the motivations for rolling? We talked a lot about this before the first roll. We will probably want to continue to talk about that for the future rolls. And then the easiest one to answer is how often to roll. And I say that's easy because people usually have a strong feeling about a certain number. And in this room, I expect at least 3 or 4 different of those certain numbers, all of whom come from people who I respect equally. Someone said, well, wait until there's a proven need. That's also the why roll at all. A bunch of people said roll every year at the last meeting, which sort of surprised me that there were vendors who said, yeah, that would be fine. There are lots of values for X here. Some people said, look, we need better tools to know when the resolvers are ready for an upcoming roll. We tried that. we thought we had that, we were wrong. That doesn't mean that we're done and we can never do better tools, but some people have said, don't roll until they're better tools, or roll after you have better tools and you have a better feeling, not like as a yes, no, or whatever. Some people said that we need better bootstrapping for the resolvers that are running up-to-date software, and therefore we shouldn't really consider a KSK future until that is more in place. Different topic, but also definitely related to KSK futures are standby keys to make it easier for systems that are using RFC 5011. I would note here that standby keys were planned for normal rollovers, so not when the active key is lost or compromised, but that is certainly a discussion, because one thing we have discovered in the last few years is that in fact 5011 has multiple uses. It didn't serve us as well as we thought necessarily in this role, but in some ways it served us better. So that's all perfectly good fodder for this discussion. Should there even be standby keys? If so, what are the considerations of putting in standby keys? Should the signing algorithm change? That is part of the KSK future, is what algorithms are we going to use? RSA is still perfectly reasonable now. We're not the only ones using RSA 2048. There are pretty much every time you open your web browser, you're using RSA 2048 a lot more often. We are talking not about the current KSK role, but future KSK roles. What kind of algorithms are we thinking about? What timing for the algorithms? Things like that. Okay, so this is my last slide. Yeah, so this is my last slide for today's discussion. Again, it's for discussion. Feel free to get up to the mic and bring in your bits, but this is really meant to be a discussion. It's fine for you to get up and say something that had nothing to do with anything I said on the last two slides. Really, this is open. We've just had a few years of surprises. It's okay for more surprises to come up today, like I've been thinking about this and I want this. That's great. We want to have this KSK futures discussion really come up. So one of the things I would like for folks at the mic to consider is will what you're suggesting going to help DNSSEC adoption? Will it hurt DNSSEC adoption? How does that affect what you are proposing? And again, I want everyone to follow Yonea-san's example. Once you've gotten up to the mic today, take what you have said to the mailing list. Really, really, that's going to amplify your opinion a great deal. And with that, the mic line is open.
Paul Wouters. Sorry, just a minute ago you said the phrase "the current DNSSEC role," and that confused me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant the last one. The one that I still feel like I'm living in it. Okay. I still have to write stuff about it. So yeah. So this is for anything in the future. At this point, we have no plans for changing the KSK again. We have written down we're supposed to do it every 5 years, but there are no concrete plans. And what we're looking for today is plans for the next one and possibly for the 2 or 3 after that. Or even thoughts about how should we make that plan.
Wes Hardiker, ISI. I think we should change bit 12 to 1. Just kidding. At a much, much higher level than that. I think that our approach of how often to roll and thinking about that question is actually broken at the moment. And so what I think that we really want is actually to answer 2 questions. 1, when should we roll next? And then 2, what should the interval be after that? Because I think that the interval between the last one and future ones are horribly different. And when we should roll next is dependent on a whole bunch of other answers to the questions like this. So
I'm sorry, and let me just ask a clarifying question there. So you propose we figure out when to roll next, and do you propose that we at that point start discussing how often to do it, or that we now have a plan for next and the future ones?
Your second point,
Right,
that I think at this point we can, with the ability to revoke that, right, and say, nope, we still didn't get it right again. Wacky stuff still happened.
Yep.
And so the rest of my thought is based on that first question, when should we roll next? And I don't think we ought to be thinking about it in terms of time at all. I think we ought to be thinking about it in terms of two lists. A showstopper list, like we will not roll until these issues have been addressed, thought of, whatever. And we should work on that list. And then, of course, there's a nice to have list, like, well, we could go forward anyway. And then some of the items that you had, should fall on one of those two lists. Is it mission critical, or this would be good, but we don't necessarily have to have it in order to proceed with the next one. So like your simulation environment or your ability to test resolvers more, given the things that happened with multiple, spikes that were not well understood, it would certainly be nice. And you are developing a wonderful test bed that actually should be able to enable this.
Don't rely on it. Don't rely on it. And so what Wes is talking about is that RSAC, the Root Server System Advisory Committee, has asked the RSAC caucus, which is a more open group of which many people here are, to develop a test bed so that we can do some testing for current things that the root server operators care about. This will be useful for other things as well. And the reason, Wes, why I'm saying don't rely on that is I suspect when we do the root cause analysis and actually get answers, they are going to be for oddball configurations we would have never simulated anyways.
That's fair.
Yeah.
In this case, at least multiple operating systems hit this bug with potential oddball configurations as a default. So if we'd run, random operating systems with their default configurations, we may have found it.
And we might run Chaos Monkey for configurations.
But I didn't want to dive down into that rat hole. I wanted to say, things like that needed to go on one of those two lists. Is this a requirement for rolling? So we will not roll until problem X is solved, or is problem X just a nice to have? If we think about it in that way, we can build a nice checklist of these are the things that must happen, and then we will decide when to roll. I don't think we ought to decide when to roll today.
Okay. Well, nothing's being decided today. I think what you meant was this year even, just in the initial plan. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, surprised that I can talk already. Matthijs Mekking, IEC. One comment. I think there are two different things, right? How often to roll and when to roll. If it's only a necessary thing, those are two separate questions. Maybe the one doesn't rule out the other, I think. So if you decide to roll with an interval, obviously still need to roll when there's a need for it. That's just a comment. The other thing is a question, and then I'm not on the list yet. So maybe I'm repeating myself. Someone else. How far in the future are you looking into making these plans? Is it just a couple of years? Is it for 10 years, 20, 40 years?
That has not been decided. That is that what we are talking about now is KSK futures, and that could be a short, the result of this could be a short future. It could be a very long future.
Right.
So the list is completely open to questions like that.
Okay, so I'm thinking a little bit, the reason I asked that question is I'm thinking a little bit longer ahead and wondering if quantum crypto is included in these plans.
It can be, like I said in the second bullet, it's okay to bring up something completely new.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Then so maybe I should bring that to the list.
Okay. And by quantum crypto, you mean actually breaking current keys with quantum computers.
Yeah, so that quantum crypto becomes a reality, then current signatures won't be useful anymore because they can be broken very easily.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. For those of you who, I was just going to help the audience here. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, there is a large body of cryptographers who believe that advances in quantum computers, which you heard a little bit about this week maybe if you went to some of the tutorials, will help break the algorithms that we are using for signing. That work is, there is already fairly good leaps in how that work would happen theoretically. And in practice, it has gone, building the quantum computers to do that has gone much slower than anyone expected 5 years ago. So we have this push-pull of that we know that if these quantum computers can be built following the algorithms that they've already looked at, the building algorithms they could probably build, that RSA 2048 will be much more susceptible to breaking than it is today. But physics gets involved, and it's not just speed of light physics, it's actually how do you keep things cold enough in order to do these and such like that. And at this point, they are confident that if the key was 5 bits long, that it could be broken. They have not gotten to 8 bits yet, much less to 2048. So it's a very interesting situation that we're in. CFRG has looked at this a little bit. I'm the primary author on a document for how do we know when we should be worried? Or I'm sorry, how will we know ahead of time when we should be worried, as it's going along? And pretty much everyone has abandoned that because we just aren't figuring out. As a result of that, there are new signing algorithms. So we're all familiar with RSA. Hopefully everyone in this room is familiar with RSA because that's what we're signing with now. Elliptic curve algorithms also are susceptible to quantum computers. So the current set of algorithms that we have are pretty much for some value of equally susceptible. And there are going to be new algorithms coming out. Okay? Sorry, Joe.
Hi, yeah, Joe Abley. Wes suggested that we break this problem space up into 2 questions, which I think is true. I think different questions, and I disagree with everything else that Wes said.
Okay.
So I think the interesting set of questions, the second set, are things like algorithm roles, standby keys, changes in the process and the personnel and the management of the key that are connected with rollover. And I think, unfortunately, we never really get to those interesting questions if we constantly fixate on the timing for the key roll and treat that as the only thing to talk about, which I think is the least interesting thing to talk about. I think we need, in order to get as many opportunities as possible to observe things and then to chase them down, and for other people to fix problems that they see independent of any kind of central management, which I think is never going to be the answer, we need a consistent cadence for key rolls. We need to be put in place. It should be as fast as possible without being imprudent. So it should be manageable within what we're doing right now, but it shouldn't be any slower than that. It should be consistent. It should be on fixed dates, and everybody concerned with this, from software to operations, should become comfortable with that. It's like to quote, well, I'm going to sound very Brexit if I say industry needs certainty. But the uncertainty in what's happening means that no one can really plan around this. We need to have a consistent scheduled key roll. And I would say that if we wait until everything is perfectly safe before we get there, we will never get there. It's the wrong approach.
So, Joe, for the list, you can do it now, but think about it. Pick a range of what you would say. I mean, once you put those 2 points on the list, it would help if you would pick a range of what you think is fast enough without being imprudent. Well, and I'm not saying you should know that now, but that would be good, because I think even people who agree with you might have a different value of that, and that will be important.
I understand why in the current way the conversation is going, that's interesting to hear, but I still think it's the wrong conversation to have.
So I'm sorry, then I misunderstood.
Well, there needs to be obviously you need to choose some date, otherwise you can't have a regular thing. Sure, I can write something on the list about that.
Great, thanks.
Evan Hunt, first of all, +1. And I'll even go further. I'll say that I think the reasonable range would be about 2 years. And we can slow it down later after we have all of the science in on how it goes smoothly, but it's not going quite smoothly yet. So once we've got the wrinkles ironed out, then slowing down would be a better consideration than slowing down before we have them out, because that's just going to make it harder. I have a couple of questions actually. You indicated that the tools that we're using to predict what was going to happen weren't catching this, but has there actually been any effort to check whether the IP addresses that were getting confused about the DNS key match up with the IP addresses that we already had telemetry for that they had not rolled?
I have not done that research. Anyone here in the room who has done that?
That's a
good question.
If there's a high degree of overlap, that would suggest that our tools are actually pretty good.
Right. That's a good question. I don't know. Please ask it on the list, because the list does have like many, many people on it, some of whom have been quiet, but might be researchers who are in fact looking at that.
Okay. The other question I wanted to ask is, did we see any operational problem from adding the standby key preparatory to the roll?
No. From from
In
my
that
view.
case- in
But
that-
wait, that's
Sorry.
one view. That's one view. Jeff, you were pointing. Did you feel like you did, or you're just agreeing with me that I just have one view? Jeff, a measurement person. Yes.
The whole issue about measuring the DNS is relatively challenging. A lot of stuff in UDP works best at packet sizes. I'm sorry.
Right. I was about to say, Jeff, I've never heard you so quiet before.
Yeah, no, I'm losing my voice.
Yeah.
We start to see loss in UDP at the ridiculously low level of 1,000 octets in our measurement exercise. There is no rational reason why this should happen. So as soon as you started publishing the standby key, it is possible that some resolvers were getting into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
This is bizarre, but it's part of these dimensions around when you increase the size of responses from the root zone above normality, you start to kick in behaviors that go, that's not normal, I will block it. And so the first key was a problem. The revoked key was a bigger problem. So yes, there are a lot of icebergs here, and that was one of them. Very hard to pin down because the DNS is so opaque, you don't know where it happens.
Right. But to answer the question differently, I'm sure Jeff saw, more failures and such like that. But did we get reports of users having problems or reports from resolver operators? No. Does that mean anything? Not really.
So we saw very definitive measurements from the ad system
Mm-hmm.
that a minimum of around 80 networks worldwide were unable to perform DNSSEC validation for a period of at least 1 day after the roll. And only one operator reported that they were dead.
Yep.
So in the new world, no one talks.
Right. And sometimes it might be because they don't even know to talk. They see something's failing, they kick the side of the machine, and it works again, and therefore they don't look at the root cause.
Okay. The reason I asked the question, though, if the collateral damage from adding a standby key before we rolled the key was relatively minimal and fixable, then maybe we should reconsider the question of whether we should have a standby key all the time, because that was the design goal of 5011 in the first place, was that there would always be a standby key so that in the event of a crisis you could roll quickly. Maybe one of the outcomes of observing this roll is that we can go back to thinking that that would be okay. Let's see, I had the final point that I wanted to raise is that clearly a big problem here is old software, which had never experienced key rollovers and is still running. And I don't know what to do about that. If I confess to having considered the fact that there are some packet of death bugs in old versions of Bind that might be exploited to help, but that would be wrong. I don't know what we do about that, but maybe rolling, for example, to a different algorithm would actually break things so much for the older machines that they would finally notice that they're sort of failing and go away.
So I thought I had. The reason I was clicking through the slides was I took out a slide that actually has the RFC 8145 data that shows that there are thousands of computers out there currently that are reporting that they only trust KSK 2010. And that number did not change when we revoked. And humorously, that number did not change last week when we removed the key. So I am also not suggesting that you do the ping of death, but I think we can safely assume that there are plenty of resolvers out in the world that get updated, right? Because none of them would have been reporting 8145 data.
Yeah.
That in fact are doing weird things that we can't rely on.
Yeah.
Okay.
One final point, and I will stop monopolizing the mic.
We're good on time. Don't worry.
It seems as if the problems that we had with this roll were at least manageable. They were confusing, but it doesn't seem to have actually broken anything. The amount of extra traffic was easily absorbed by available provisioning, which is another reason I think we should not be scared to do it again. So thanks.
Thanks.
So Martin Thompson, I was going to make the point that I think Joe made more eloquently than I could have, but I think you're downplaying the post-quantum problem too much. And if past performance is any prediction of future behavior, then we have a problem with the cadence at which these keys roll over. The time frames we're talking about for post-quantum computers are somewhere between 2 and 50 years. It's really hard to tell. Obviously, you've done the research on this yourself, Paul. But if you're not in a position where you can react to new information in a relatively short time scale, and the sort of time scales we're talking about could be in the order of 18 months or so, you get a clue that someone's doing something that may or may not require some sort of reaction. If you can't have a process in place to get, I don't know, hash-based signatures into the system, then you're going to be in real trouble when the time comes that, right, there is a genuine problem out there.
Right.
And
let me restate what you just said, which is that if our current algorithms are susceptible, we
Right.
need to be able to be agile to actually add in new algorithms that are not standardized
right.
today.
And it may be the case that you need to have multiple algorithms running concurrently, because some people will be on the old software and some people will be on the new software, and that's going to be, larger responses, particularly when you talk about things like hash-based signatures. They're kind of, the keys are enormous.
Can
as well
be.
as the signatures, and so you need to have a system that can deal with those problems as well. But I think at the moment, operationalizing routine updates to the key signing keys is the first challenge, and then you'll be in a position to do the next thing. That means, however, that you need to start moving now, because it's going to take a number of years, based on the sort of cadence that people are talking about, to get to the position where people are comfortable with all of the costs and risks associated with rolling the keys before you can even start contemplating adding new, large, unwieldy post-quantum things to run in parallel with your classic algorithms. So I'm really concerned even if you manage to enact this sort of thing that rolls on a 1-year time scale in the next 3 or 4 years, that you then have another 5 or 6 years after that before you can get any reasonable penetration of some quantum safe algorithms. You're now talking about landing right in the sort of middle of the timescales that people are predicting that quantum computers are going to be big enough to do things like break RSA or the elliptic curve stuff. And so I just sort of put a little bit of heat underneath this, and there's a little bit of more urgency, and I think some people are sort of talking about here. Then just move on this, please.
Right. So as a follow-on to that, there are plenty of people in this room who understand DNSSEC well enough to know how it deals with multiple algorithms at the same time. Different security mechanisms such as TLS, SMIME, etc., deal with having multiple signatures with different algorithms differently. So and DNSSEC is its own thing. It sounds like you're also asking that people who, even if they aren't looking at the specific algorithms, who know about how to deal with multi-algorithm signatures would be looking at that as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the system needs to be ready for a post-quantum thing by perhaps even contemplating moving to ED 25519 or one of the elliptic curve ones and having that in place, or trying it out at least. I don't know what that process is going to look like, but what I'm hearing from the discussions here is largely that we're concerned about just putting a different RSA key in place is going to be challenging. And so if that's the first hurdle to get over, but then there's a much bigger hurdle coming, which is, as you say, working out how to operate the system with multiple different types of keys.
I didn't say that was that much of a challenge, because in fact, we have examples of TLDs who have already started working on,
Right.
I'm not going to start working.
I'm sure the system is designed to accommodate this. We wouldn't be that crazy, but
Thank you for your confidence.
yeah, I'm feeling optimistic this week.
Thank you for your optimism. Okay.
Hi, Ola Wilmerson. I'm finding this discussion a little bit depressing.
Sorry.
So I want to actually start looking at the bigger picture. And the thing is, we can basically say that this key rollover was a success, a roaring success. There were a few things that we just saw on the way that maybe we didn't know about, we didn't expect or anticipate. But the criteria we should be applying to the overall role is how many outages were there and how many entities turned off the NSX because of this. And I think both of these numbers are very small. I haven't done the extensive research or that, but Jeff and I may, of course, disagree. The little bit, if you take your traffic graph, please bring that up. Yes. Okay. What is missing from this graph is, was this a big portion of the route traffic or was this noise?
No, it's look at the last bullet.
8%. That's noise. Sorry.
Okay.
50%, 100%, that would be something that would be scary. Yeah, I find this small. Yeah. There were bugs. We will find out what they were. There were misconfigurations. But the overall thing that I take from this role, and I want people to take home to make people like Martin more comfortable, the role worked. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Lars Lehmann, on that note. I am on the same frame as Joe here, so this is a +1. I think we should look at what we want to accomplish with these roles. And to me, what we want to accomplish is to make the machinery turn. This is something that needs to be automated on the client side, so to speak. And if it's not, it's when we really need to do something, it's not going to work. It's like the diesel generators in your machine room. You don't wait. You don't wait with testing them until you're out of power. You run them every month to make sure that everything actually works as intended.
I'm not going to ask everyone in the room how many people actually do that, but yeah. Right.
Well, if you don't, you should.
Right.
So I want the role to be fairly frequent. Not too frequent, but fairly frequent, so that we can do an investigation afterwards, but so that everyone knows it will happen again. If it was painful one time, it will be painful one time again soon, within a year or two. And if I don't fix this, it's going to continue to be painful. That way, it will turn into an automated thing, and when we finally have to do something because a key has been compromised or something, the machinery will be well oiled and actually functioning. So that's I vote for fairly frequent and regular updates, not because the key is broken. And to wait for people to fix their systems or that we fully understand the bugs, sorry, it's not going to happen. We will wait forever.
Okay, while you're fumbling with the microphone, because the person behind you is shorter.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, I wanted to put this slide up again because a lot of people have come in the room late. Just to emphasize, everyone who's come up to the mic has not really volunteered, but I wish they had, to actually take their comments to the mailing list. And here's the mailing list. Rich.
Yeah, hi, Rich Salzak. I'll post this to the list. I think you should do one more announced rollover and then stop announcing them. Because if you announce them and industry gets used to a cadence of every November 23rd or whatever it is, then you're not going to be able at all to handle the emergency. And the emergency, whenever it comes, you might have a few months. But yeah, do one more announcement. That was your early warning. And then from now on, whenever ICANN decides it's going to roll, whatever cadence it wants, just do it.
So thanks. And for the people applauding, I would be very interested if any of the people applauding were actually software vendors. And I'm not saying they would or wouldn't, because at the meeting 2 weeks ago, software vendors surprised me. So I'm very interested in specifically how software vendors respond to suggestions like that. Like I said, I was surprised 2 weeks ago. I'm happy to be surprised today. I'm not suggesting, oh, they will hate it. But when some of the proposals today affect software vendors, I want to hear from them as well.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me bump the line. This is Peter van Dijk, Power DNS. I'm a software vendor. I was clapping.
Great.
We believe we can deal with a role within the weeks.
Okay.
Either trickling down through Debian or through our own distributions.
Great. Thanks.
Jumping the line, same as Peter. Great. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Thanks. Paul Wouters, Red Hat, a somewhat larger company than one of these software vendors. We'd like a little bit more than 2 weeks.
Okay. But you would be okay with unannounced? Okay, great. Thanks.
Matt Poundset. So I'm going to repeat something I said at the OARC meeting last fall, which is that I don't think the role period is a question of community policy or community input. I think that's an operational choice that should be made by the root zone partners. I recognize that a lot of people disagree with me, and so I think it would be a good idea if ICANN and VeriSign got together, decided what you're comfortable with. Echoing Joe, I think it should be as quickly as you are operationally comfortable with. I suspect that's not going to be every year, given how the key signing ceremonies work, but that at least the initial proposal should come from the root zone partners for it, at the very least, given in terms of a range. Here's what we're operationally comfortable doing. We can't do it any faster than this, at least. Then let people comment on that. But yeah, because I don't think we're going to get very far having the community constantly discussing how often key roles should be. So yeah, and so to echo somebody else, we'll do one more announced. We'll figure that out. Do one more announced one, then just make it a schedule. And ICANN and VeriSign do it when you think you need to do it for operational reasons. And yeah, so that we can get on to talking about things like, whether we should be talking about an algorithm role or whether we should or new tooling or all those things that would actually be a lot more interesting for the community to work on, I think.
Peter Koch-Dienig.
And yes, I will repeat that on the mailing list. Thank you. That was the most important part. No.
That was Matt again. So Peter now. One observation maybe and one remark. So when I hear that current algorithms are going to break and maybe in 3 to 4 years, or we need to have the next one ready by then, as well as multi-algorithm scenarios, I could imagine that that's close to an operational nightmare debugging ways in terms of packet sizes and everything. And I would not know what to recommend to people when they ask whether it's worth deploying DNSSEC or not. So we might want to be a bit more careful in what signals we send to the outside in terms of how ready this whole thing is for deployment in the first place. Because on one of your previous slides, you had that remark, would it help foster deployment or something like that? The remark I was going to make is, and that goes slightly in the direction that Matt was turning into, but I derive probably a different conclusion here. So determining the trust anchor is ultimately the responsibility of the resolver or validator operator. Now making that decision for them, that the automated rollover, transforming trust from the previous to the next key, that may or may not work. We've had a couple of potential failure modes based on people intentionally having fixed trust anchors instead of relying on updated, automatical updating of this, maybe from practical purposes, like they just couldn't write that particular piece of the file system, or deliberate decisions. And I'm missing those voices raised or those voices heard, and I think we need to broaden that discussion, and we need to understand the failure modes. And then there's the question, because somebody said, well, 8%, any percentage is noise, maybe a bit loud noise, but the interesting question is, how many kitten are we willing to sacrifice, and how do we arrive at that number? And that's, of course, a governance issue to be dealt with at some point, but maybe that's a question we should ask ourselves.
Thanks. So going with what you had just said about the hearing the voices, the people who do hard configuration and such like that. If anyone in the room here has any suggestions for how we find those people, I mean, if anyone in the room is one of those people, great, please come to the mic. If you have any suggestions for how we find those people and get their voices on the mailing list as well, I would greatly appreciate it.
So this is Jeff Houston. I'll try and swallow the mic. What did we learn? The first thing we learned is that we rolled it. The second thing we learned is that a minimum of 250 million users were affected negatively. At least one major provider turned off validation across the point of the roll and the point of the revocation. So when you're looking for damage, part of the damage was a number of folk who had their ISPs resolvers doing validation did not. There are also a number of providers that never turned it back on, but that wasn't the 250 million. Fourthly, an 18-month protracted performance is not a rehearsal for catastrophe. It just isn't the same thing. Please drop your bomb in 18 months' time is a ridiculous statement. No matter how we do this, 5011 is a problem for us if we have catastrophe. And part of this issue of why are we rolling the key is a very fundamental question. And what we've done so far is prove that it is possible with some casualties to roll, but we have not proved that we can react to catastrophe. What else have we learned? The DNS over UDP with TCP as a backup is an abject failure for large responses. And as we try and go to either bigger keys or more keys, and revocation is certainly right up there, stressing at these points, we have learned that the system is not reliable all the time everywhere. But we've also learned that the DNS is so opaque, we don't understand where the problems are. And that opacity is really an issue. The two things we tried to measure trust anchor, both in terms of I've forgotten what the first one was called, the TA query and the response behaviors, neither were fielded in a way that we could use usefully. We don't understand the DNS. So trust key management is pathetic. We've learned that. 30-day lead-in times are just ridiculous if you're trying to do catastrophic management. Legacy is a real issue, but it's also coupled with tolerance for risk. This room might have one tolerance. The ICANN room might have a different tolerance. Folk who feel themselves responsible in a sense that someone will sue the pants off me have a different tolerance. It's all one DNS and one root. We don't understand.
And another group, the governments that actually don't understand any of this will have a different tolerance.
A long queue of folk who have differing tolerances for risk.
Yeah.
So Peter's question about how many kittens, oddly enough, has no answer. Just remember that. And last and not least, after at least 30 years, the DNS can surprise us every time.
Every time.
And so if we think we've got this under control, we are deluding ourselves. It is not a scientific observation. The more correct observation is we have no clue.
I didn't hear that. Did you have like a little thing in your throat there for that last bit?
Mike St. John's. Two things. First, let me get back to sacrificing kittens for a half second. Human psychology is such that in the midst of a disaster, there's always going to be people who don't evacuate, don't save themselves, and they could.
A story about that is at the last meeting, this exact KSK roll meeting, there was an earthquake during the meeting, and Yonea-san and I actually had exactly different reactions to what to do in the earthquake. Literally. I mean, if you watch the tape, you will see me do one thing and Yonea-san saying, no, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, different learning responses.
Yep.
The second thing is going back to the quantum stuff for a half second. We're already screwed in that particular space because one, we don't have an algorithm that everybody's agreed on that we could do quantum signing. If we did have the algorithm, then we'd have to have the RFC to do the DNS stuff, and that would take a couple of years. Then we'd have to get the uptake into the resolvers, which is another 5 years or so. So wherever the quantum apocalypse is, we've got that problem. Combined with that is every time we do changes to this particular part of the DNS, the question about uptake on DNSSEC becomes kind of an interesting one to look at. You talked about what, 250 million people going away, and well, some of them came back, right? Okay. That 8% we were talking about is based on an uptake of about 15% DNSSEC right now. What's the number? Huh? 20%. So if we're talking about turning it on 100%, that 8% in the back becomes, we need to figure out how to protect the resolver, the root systems against DNSSEC, which is kind of a sad thing to say.
Hi, this is Yoshiro Yonea. So my idea to gather operators' opinion to the list is to convey survey such I did in Japan. Such kind of survey do not need a name of the operators, just gather the opinions anonymously. And for example, I can proxy it to the list. So having a survey who are not, so that people who are shy to say something to the public mailing list, the survey will help those people. And translation in the local languages are very important to gather much wider opinions from the operators of the world. So I think such kind of activity should be done collaboratively among people here.
Great, thanks. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we talked about this in a presentation before the October 11th roll. JPRS took a survey of, well, what are you going to do and how's your key ready, that we had sort of done in ICANN, translated into Japanese and got it to the Japanese operator community. And then came back with some interesting results. In fact, that there were operators who said, on October 11th, we're going to change from the old key to the new key manually. You know, that was a thing we learned from that. So if there are other folks here in the room who have local communities that you can ask about these questions, and you can say to them, if you don't want to get on the mailing list and state what's going on, I'll proxy for you. Please feel free to do that. We do not, that is valuable information to us. It was valuable for the October 11th roll. It will certainly be valuable for this KSK Futures conversation.
Wes Hardiker, ISI. So back to my list of musts and mays, I'll give you a must. I think that we must have a strategy for dealing with boxes that are sitting on shelves for a long period of time.
Warren Kamari, that was sort of a nice setup. So we'd actually written a document which we were calling ball and chain, which allows you to sort of forward chain DNSSEC keys. Sorry, we being Wes and myself. And so basically sort of standard perfect forward sign secrecy type thing. Each key signs the next one. The plan is stuff that's sitting on a shelf enters at the key that it knows about and then fast forwards till it finds the current key, with the hope/assumption that when a box is first unplugged and connected to the network, it's not sitting behind somebody who happens to have managed to compromise it and be in a place to forge its view of the world. Yes, it's not perfectly secure, but I think it's a reasonable trade-off that lets us go forward. Yep, after we wrote it, actually last week I think it was, we remembered a document which was written by Wouter Weingard in 2002, 2012, a really, really, really long time back, 2009, which does very similar things, and I think that we should talk to him about sort of combining it. Anyway, that's not actually why I was at the mic.
Although that draft has not been published, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So not only do I want people sending things to the mailing list, I wouldn't mind if drafts got published.
Yep. Yeah. We will publish as a draft. We wrote it in January 2015, and then it fell on the floor.
And you did shop it around, but that was also, I mean, you had mentioned it to me.
Yep.
So I'm just saying that that would also be useful if you want it to be part of the conversation, that it was
Yeah,
visible.
I must admit it was during the there must be implementations discussion, and we got disgusted and wandered off. But separate rant there. What I actually got up to say is I was one of the people who was saying that I think we need to be really, 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 really careful before we did the first roll. When we did the first roll, there was some breakage, but I think a lot of people learned a lot of things. And I think that we're now in a place where when we do the next roll, there'll be a lot less breakage. Following rolls, there'll be very, very, very lot less breakage. So I think that we should try and do these on a fairly regular basis. My personal view is sort of about a yearish. When we just at the meeting in Kobe, I suggested.
Frontline. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
At the meeting in Kobe, I was saying I think that we need to stop and pause this until we have a better understanding why the queries keep going up after the revocation. And so I think that we understand that well enough. So I'm personally relatively comfortable with these happening and happening fairly often. I do think that we should really spend more time discussing stuff like standby keys. 5011 original design had the sort of understanding that there would be standby keys most of the time. We should be discussing that more, algorithm role more. And also I really think that there should be a properly published discussion of how we expect to do emergency key roles. Where this will be published, what we're all supposed to do, who pulls what levers when. So,
thanks. Yes.
So a little bit in response to Warren, and apparently this draft has now mentioned about building a chain of old keys that sign other keys. So definitely I remember all the drafts that did exactly this in the special zone, and questions for who maintains it and what happens. But a very important thing, if we really think of picking up this work, we really need to immediately tell IANA or whoever, or VeriSign, whoever is in control of the HSM, to not destroy the keys, because we will need them to sign something new very soon. That's too late already?
Too late for the current set. So they aren't physically destroyed, but they've been revoked. So, person from IANA is saying no. So. So Paul just asked, not at Mike, do we need to request it? Use the list.
Out of Colgon, interested individual. Question, how many people who have not bought into the DNSSEC project have been impacted by the role? That is, there are a bunch of people who were bought in. They set up a validated name service. The root server system is sort of bought in. They publish a DNS key. But how many recursive name servers that have not bought into the project have seen failure?
That's a very good question.
So I think the underlying requirement there is that there is a must in terms of fate sharing. People who are not bought in should not be impacted by any role. If you don't have, I mean, in terms of DNS infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Warren and Wes's suggestion about keeping a list of signed key things really won't work. What you really want is a record of the state of the trust anchor system at any given point in time, and a way of tracking that forward. And just doing the signatures doesn't work, because signatures are not bound in time. They may have a date stamp inside what's being signed, but if you have the key, and if the key's been revoked because it was compromised, you can basically sign anything, and anything downstream from there is just bad. So you need something else if you're going to do it. I don't know enough about where you want to go with this thing, but that spending time on that is not going to be a useful approach. It may be.
I'm
what
glad you
end
didn't
up
say
doing.
that at the mic. Okay, if we can get through the next 15 minutes without that word being said at the mic, I'm happy.
Yeah, it may be where you go with it, but again,
Don't say the word.
It's a question of tracking the state of the trust of the trust anchor set, not the forward key signing from it. So.
Okay, so we have time left, but I see no one else at the mic other than Kim from IANA. Kim, would you like to finish this up for us?
Maybe. Quick clarification on the old KSK. According to the current operational plans, we start deleting it from HSMs at the next key ceremony, and it will be deleted from all of our HSMs in the ceremony plan for August. So we still have it, but that's the current plan. So if there was to be some kind of adjustment to sign some kind of chain, then that would need to be decided in the next few months.
It's not 4 months. I think it's closer to 2. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So, thank you. A bunch of people actually said they were going to send things to the list, so I really appreciate it. A bunch of you didn't, but I would like you to thank you. Rich is saying have the list there. I would like those of you who did not say that you would send it to the list to reconsider and send it to the list. Dan?
Dan York, individual. There, some people were putting stuff in Etherpad too, so there is some notes there.
Ah, very good. Thank you. Really, truly, the list is a great place for discussion. We've only had one incidence of snark happen, and I sort of tried to squash that, and the snarkitude person had said, thank you for squashing it. I would love to see this, since we are not going to come, this is not a consensus list. This is a list of ideas that IANA will then think about and use. And then again, let me just show you the next steps here. Second half of 2019, IANA is going to review the discussion, evaluate the proposals, prepare a draft plan. Hopefully, that's a squishy date, but I think that seems reasonable. But the most important part of that is that they're going to bring the plan to the community for public review. I would love to see lots of discussion before IANA has to bring stuff to the community. The way that the ICANN process works is that not bringing the community is a consensus call as much as a call for comments. It's nice and formalized. You can put in comments, you can see other people's comments and such like that. But the end of all of this will be a plan that we would like to have as fully informed as we can be. If you have a great idea that comes up after the plan is published, that's not as good as if you have a great idea that comes up before the plan is published. So please keep active on the mailing list. Oh, and one other note, because this has happened to me a couple times, please do not reach out to me or other ICANN staff with your great idea this week. It is simply a waste of time. That is, I actually have no more say than any of you do on this, and I will probably disagree with you. So you telling me that won't necessarily get your idea all the way through. You all have shown today and at other times you know how to state your opinions. Please do so yourself so that we can have a good, vibrant discussion. Thank you. Blue sheets can come to the front. Anyone else for blue sheets? Okay, over here.
Hey, Paul.
Yep.
Blockchain.
I had already turned off the mics for that, so okay.
You got an extra year because when quantum comes, they're going to spend all the time breaking TLS before they bring
I'm not. The mics are live, so I should say this quietly, but the DNSSEC root sign-off key is literally probably the least important 2048 key available. No, but I've said that like within ICANN, and people are like, and they were like, yeah, you're right. and quite frankly, Puneet, how are you doing? Oh, you wanted to sign blue sheet, great, yeah. Thank you, sir. Also, there is what's known as 3096. Because one thing that we do know about unless something radically changes, is the computer that you use to break a 2048 bit key